Hello and welcome to Let's Chat Death, Dying, Funerals and Grief with me, your host, Anna Bushell. Every month, I will be welcoming a special guest to chat all things death, dying, funerals and grief. Not the most light-hearted topics, I know, but that's the whole point of this podcast, to shine a light on these often seen as taboo subjects with a view to hopefully dispel some fears and encourage others to be brave and have these conversations. For this episode, I am pleased to be welcoming a fellow celebrant, Gail. Hi, Gail, and welcome.
Hello. Hi, thank you. Great to be here. Excited
Love.
for this chat.
It's so good to have a fellow celebrant that I can natter away with. I,
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's good. I'm excited. I always think it's good to be able to have these conversations and advocate for openness in this space. So the more we
yeah,
talk about it, the better it is, I think, and it helps
yeah,
people heal.
definitely. And I think in the work that we do, we notice how
Mm,
much or what an impact not having these conversations has
yeah,
on families. You know, we're really at the coalface with that. Um,
absolutely.
Whereabouts are you? Where do you do your celebranting?
So I have recently moved to Lancashire, around the Blackburn area. But latterly I was in Scotland. You can tell from the
Yes,
accent. So
yeah,
I was a celebrant up there, really sort of for the 2025 and tail end of 24 was when I really invested time in the celebrant work. After my training, I just realised I really enjoyed it, but part of it when you're a celebrant is being available to
mm,
actually do the services. So if before I had a full-time job, it was quite tricky to manage some of that. So
yeah,
dedicating the time to it has meant that obviously the focus on my business is there. And then moving down here, I'm sort of, I was going to say starting again, which I sort of am
yeah,
really, because,
yeah,
you build relationships with funeral directors and, obviously back in Scotland, maybe friends or family or people know who you are so that you'll get a word of mouth recommendation.
yeah.
But down here I'm new, so I'm hoping that I might become known as, oh, who's that Scottish celebrant? I want
Yes,
them.
yes, yeah, and I love the Scottish accent as well. You know, I kind of get a bit frustrated that I've not got more of a in-depth accent. I've got various accents, but none of them are proper. You know,
Yeah.
obvious. And yeah, I love the Scottish accent. Yeah, could listen to
Oh.
you talking all day long. So that always puts you in good stead.
It does, it does. Although I was laughing that, I mean, I think sometimes us Scots can be quite broad. But I had a funeral. I've got one booked in, and I was visiting the client, and the family were there, and there was I hadn't they were very broad Lancashire.
Yeah,
I always say Lancashirian, and my partner's like, Gail, what are you talking
it's
about?
Lancastrian. Yeah,
I know, and a quite broad Blackburn accent, and I did have to ask them to repeat things a couple of times. So I was like, and then, but once you tune in, you're like, oh right,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
and because you're scribbling when you're meeting people and trying to get names and capture the essence of what's going on in the room.
yeah,
So, but it's good. I like the accent down here.
yeah.
It's just there's richness, isn't there, in every
Yeah, there
area
is.
really. So
Yeah. It's the same with the Yorkshire dialect, and like it's really strong in different parts of
yeah,
like West and South Yorkshire. And yeah, there's a whole like other language when it comes to the Barnsley dialect that you've got to learn and tune into, but it's fab.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So in terms of like your experience as a celebrant, what have you
Mm.
found people find difficult with the process of a
Mm,
funeral and bereavement? Obviously, you know, aside from the utter heartache they feel,
yeah.
but kind of what things have you noticed being a funeral celebrant that people really struggle with?
I think initially, whenever I go and meet a family, the immediate thing I get is like there's nerves. So setting aside all the grief and the heartache that's there, like they're really nervous about the process of,
Yeah.
meeting with us. And I suppose irrespective of whether it's a religious or non-religious service, right? I think there's an apprehension because, especially if you've never done it, you don't know what that process is.
Mm,
So I always sense there's a nervousness and part of the job or part of what I like to do is just sort of put them at ease
yeah.
and it's just like to get them to realize that this is just a conversation about their loved one
Hmm.
and the more we just have a chat, and I mean, I have a checklist of questions and things like that, but
Yeah.
I feel if I go in with a sense of, okay, question number one,
Hmm.
answer this, question number
Yeah.
two, I feel that for me and the style this t style of ceremony that I like to write and produce and deliver is more trying to get to the essence of the person. And
Mm.
so part of that's about getting the family to feel more at ease, to feel that they can open up, that they can share, that they can have a laugh, that they can have a
Mm.
cry. And
Yeah.
when they start to settle into that process of recognizing that this isn't an exam, there's no right or wrong answer, that you really start to get them to relax. And I really see that it helps their grieving process when they start to speak with the celebrant. And so that's something that I feel is such an honor to be able to do,
Mm.
is we're not just here to write the service and deliver for the client. I really see it as a vocation that I'm here to hold some space for those people that are there.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, we've all got bills to pay, right? So, as a celebrant, you're a business and you are thinking, well, I can't be here all day because that's, your hourly rate. But there's times where I sit there and I think, this family needs me to be here longer. And I will
Yeah.
just sit there and I've got everything I need for the service, but I just sit and let them
Mm.
talk.
Yeah.
Um, so I just think that that's part of the process, and actually why actually having a funeral is really important, not just, it's for the people that are left behind to help them really adjust.
Yeah, well, it is, isn't it?
Mm.
That is what a funeral is for. It's for the living because,
Yeah.
the person has gone, whether we believe in some kind of life after death or not, but,
Mm.
a funeral is for the living, and it is a way of being able to begin to sort of
Yeah.
work through the bereavement process, and there's never an end to it, but it's a step on the journey of it.
It is. I think there's so many practical things that are going on at that point in time.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, you know, like whether that is people trying to clear out houses or they're looking for photographs for a slideshow, or maybe they're under some pressure to respond to something from the funeral director, or so it's like you're trying to deal with this grief whilst actually getting through a list of tasks that need to happen.
Yeah.
And I think as well that, this is also the time where people are on the phone to you. They want to share their condolences. They're coming round to the house. And so it's almost
Yeah.
like it's getting up to the funeral point is then, and after that, that's the point where actually, particularly those that are closest, can really truly start to do some of their grieving,
Mm.
because there's so much to just deal with. And I
Yeah.
think, for me, like when I go in and speak to a family and just acknowledge that, and for them to feel that it's a normal, it's quote unquote normal, isn't it really? But that
Yeah.
what they're feeling and what they're experiencing is fairly common, and this is a
Yeah.
natural process, and that, it's okay if you feel that you can't get out of bed in the morning because you're just
Mm.
so sad, and
Yeah.
that or you're getting really angry because people are coming round, or you're feeling like pecked at with like being pulled in all these different directions. But I think just to have some comfort that that's a normal thing. There's just so
Mm.
many demands, I think, on the individual, like practical constraints or
Yeah.
practical considerations rather, to the whole sort of process. And
Mm.
then it's like it's almost like you've sort of popped your grief in a little bucket over to the side
Yeah.
whilst you get
That,
through all of this admin.
totally.
Um, and it's and that's the bit for me where I think when we go in as celebrants, we have an opportunity to give them a little bit of time, an hour or two, just to sit and talk about that person
Mm.
and,
Yeah.
you know, share the stories or shed a tear or,
Mm.
have a laugh or,
Yeah.
just even reflect on things or have things played back where you're suddenly like, actually, yeah, that person was pretty amazing. And,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
it's, I think we just like to talk about the person that's passed, and the celebrant
Yeah.
gives that opportunity, setting aside all the administration that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think, I like to see that when you've gone in to meet somebody and that nerves and they think, oh, this is just another piece of admin and it's a
Yeah,
necessary thing. And, and especially if the person who's passed hasn't left any wishes, you sort of think it's quite a big thing to think, I've got
yeah,
to try and for the
it's
family to be
huge.
like, I'm curating this service.
Yeah.
And so I like to think as the celebrants, if we can just give them, the family just an hour or two where they can just sort of relax into have sharing some memories and
Mm.
start on that sort of grieving process and adjusting to the absence of that their loved one. Put my teeth in.
Yeah, it's I absolutely agree with everything you've said. And listening to you talking about it reminds me why I do it, because
Mm,
it is, I think, I actually think meeting the family and talking about their special person, that's the bit of this job, or it's not a job, it's a vocation that I love the most.
mm.
And I always think, well, maybe I'm just like a little bit nosy because I'm
Yes.
fascinated about people's lives and the things that they've
Yeah.
done. And
Uh-huh.
it doesn't, people, it's not just about people who've like led extravagant lives, or and
No.
traveled the world or done this, that, and the other. Sometimes quite the most smallest simple life, where they've born and bred in the same village, maybe never gone abroad, had a passport, I just love it all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting to the essence of who the person was, and actually, just the most recent one that I've just written was very similar, where the person who passed, as you say, like they don't have like a big hit CV of like
Mm,
all of these grand jobs or qualifications, but it's like what's the person's legacy? And actually
mm,
it's so interesting, especially when you get more than one person in a room to talk about the individual, because you start to see the common threads and how they were viewed through many people's lenses. And you just start to really think, what's the impact this person has made on their world and the
yeah.
people, and what is it that they're going to be missed for?
Mm,
Um, and I think that's bit where, I always like to think, if you're sitting in the one of the mourners at the
mm,
service, and to think about, I always like to think, have I been able to express how that person touched people's lives
mm.
over sort of achievements, like they did
Yeah,
this job or they
totally.
lived in that place. Now obviously families want some of that recorded and it is part of
Mm,
somebody's legacy for certain individuals,
mm,
but it's when you start to realize that what did that person mean. And actually,
mm,
because sometimes we play down people, maybe because you like that your example of the person who stayed in a village and didn't really go anywhere, but actually to some people there's like a societal conditioning to think that person hasn't achieved anything, but actually
yeah.
that is so untrue. And the more you do this type of work, the more you realize that how integral people like that are to their community and
Mm,
how important they are. And actually that person will be deeply, deeply missed because they
yeah.
were just, it's like being part of the bricks and the mortar.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's always interesting when you sit, and I think when you go in to meet a family, and if they are sitting and their loved one was that person, and they think, well, what are we going to fill 20 minutes with?
Yeah.
But then when you start talking and you realize how they were, how they showed up for people, or their regular routine and the people that they met, or their common
Mm,
phrases that they would say, and actually how much like love and there was for that individual, the
mm,
family actually start to realize they're like, oh yeah, actually this person was so integral in this community, in this family. And
right.
and it is a weird thing, isn't it, where you think, society expects certain things, but actually these are the
Yeah.
people that are the bedrock of our communities, really.
100%. Yeah. And it's very much needed. And
Mm.
actually, the emphasis has gone too much on big and bold and
Yeah,
huge and consume and grand and everything. And actually smaller is where people are more content, you know,
yeah.
getting back down to basics. And yeah. Oh, yes. Everything you have said, 100% agree with. Um, like, I don't know about you, but I have certain kind of opinions on like our traditional way of
Yeah.
funerals. What are your thoughts on the way we
Yeah.
traditionally do funerals in this country?
I mean, obviously 20 minutes is quite short if
I
somebody's lived
know.
on this planet for 90 years.
I
Um,
know.
and
Yeah.
even if they haven't been here that long, if you think of, what have you just done in the last 20 minutes of your life alone? And then you think,
Mm,
I think I I find that it does make me feel a little sad where if you're having to cut services to
yeah.
squeeze into a time frame.
Yeah.
And obviously, I would, if families can book double slots, so there is a way
Yeah.
around these things, but
Yeah.
that comes at an expense.
Mm,
And also, I think because people don't really go beyond the 20 minutes, I suppose, unless you're in like a church service where you've actually got the church service wrapped around the funeral, you're
mm,
not expecting to be sat there for an hour listening to about a person.
yeah.
Um, and for some people, sitting in a crematorium, like, because I think some people feel crying in public, they don't like it. And so to feel that you've got to sit beyond 20 minutes and hold
Mm,
back your emotion, that's quite a lot for some people. So I think
yes.
how we have sort of gotten into this routine of a service being 20 minutes has sort of fulfilled multiple needs that were around at a particular time. But I find it really hard when I've got to cut stuff out of a service
Mm,
because people, especially if people want to have a reflection and they want to listen to a full song that's 6 minutes long, and
yeah.
then, so you're immediately, as a celebrant, you're always like, part of our job is to try and capture the essence and who a person was, meet the needs of the client, and do it all within the time frame of what the crematorium booking slot is. And,
Yeah.
some places will betide you if you go over the 20 minutes.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, they
and you
do.
just think, but, grief doesn't really have that sort of time frame really, but that sort of frustrates me a little. I think part of, I suppose, maybe what you're, the way you started off as your introduction around what you're looking to do here, having the conversation about death and dying is actually for people to realize that they can do things differently,
Yeah.
and that actually, you can co-collaborate with a funeral director who will do things differently, and a celebrant or whoever you
Yeah.
want to have involved in that. And, obviously, there's a practical element of something has to happen with the body, right? But how you
Yes.
you
Yeah.
commemorate that, there is some flexibility there. And, there's a few companies that I follow on social and things that I think are trying to do things a little differently,
Mm,
and, honor the individual in the unique way that they were.
mm,
Um, I think the other thing that I find that sort of a little sad as well is the growth in the direct cremation,
yeah.
which, for anybody listening who doesn't know what that is, it's the body is cremated and there's nobody there, so there is no service to wrap around that, and then the family can receive the ashes back. Now, I think if the family choose to do a service around the ashes, I think that helps because as
That's
you
good.
said, the funerals for the people that are here.
Yeah.
To me, I always think there's a sort of psychology of like you've attended the funeral, like the person has
Definitely.
died, they're not on holiday. Like your
Yeah.
psychology, their psyche picks up on that.
Yeah.
Um, I just think it's nice to do things a little different. Like, 'cause, not everybody's the same. We're not, we're all unique individuals, and to have a
Yeah.
service that is as unique as you, and whether that's like the songs, and in fact, the family that I just met, they had initially provisionally picked some songs for their service, which were probably quite typical, is maybe the best way I would describe it.
Yeah.
But when I was talking to them, they were like, "Oh, my mum really wanted, like she joked about several times about having Wham! Wake Me Up Before You Go Go as the exit song."
Brilliant.
And I just said to her, I was like, "Do it." I said,
Yeah.
because I was like, "Your mum said this several times to you,
Yeah.
because she thinks it'll be quite funny, and this will make everybody remember." And I was like, "Do what you want, not what you feel is the right
Totally.
thing to do."
Totally.
Um,
Yeah. And I mean, I've had this with my families. I had exactly the same, and I think something that folk are not aware of, or maybe just this is just sort of what I always thought, was that if you wanted to do something different with regard to a funeral, something not the traditional thing, and it may be viewed as extravagant, that actually it would be more expensive to do
Mm,
something different. But if going back to your point of like direct cremations, there is no funeral. It is
mm,
just a way of disposing of the body. So,
mhm.
a lot of people are very much aware of the financial impact it will have on their family when they pass away. So they're just like, no fuss, nothing, just literally direct cremation. And like you say, that's not really good for those that are left behind. But even so, you could have a direct cremation and then have a gathering in your home, in
Yeah,
if that's too much pressure, somebody else's home, in a back garden, in a woodland somewhere. You can do something else to create almost a funeral for that
yeah,
person, a ceremony, a service for the living. And it's easy to have uh, Bluetooth speakers. So
hmm
some music
hmm
can be played outside. We've got access to things like that now, and you could have people sharing their memories if they feel comfortable doing that, or the celebrant can gather those memories and read them out and share them, and you could have some poems and things, and you can do that really cheaply.
Yeah,
um
absolutely. And,
and it,
and you don't even really need it not to do us out of a job, but you really don't even need a celebrant. And actually, I would work with somebody on a lower fee basis to write
mm,
something to help them structure it, and they just deliver it. Because obviously, part of our fee is this showing up to deliver the service as well. But you can
yeah,
work with a celebrant to help you structure any sort of ceremony.
yeah,
And it's even like the other thing that popped into my head there was if somebody knows that they are passing,
yes,
is you can have a living wake.
yeah,
So I love this. I did when I did my death doula training, we did a lot of work around living wakes
yeah, me too.
and weirdly I hosted a living wake for somebody. She wasn't dying, but she wanted to kind of close off a chapter in her life and really almost
Okay.
like a rebirth.
Yeah, yeah.
But I met her on my doula training, and so she was like, "I really want this living wake. Will you do it?" And it was amazing. And
Uh,
and I think sometimes I don't know if we would call it like grief bypassing or emotional bypassing. Like some people, like my parents, they were like, "We're not. I'd just cremate me and then have the sandwiches after."
yeah,
And I'm like,
yeah.
but that's and their rationale for it was because they didn't want us to be sad and upset I'm like, but that's part of the processing of the emotion and the healing.
Mm.
And then maybe this is a personal view, I know, but I'm just a bit like, I don't think you can get to the point of feeling healed or, through your grief without having those perceived negative emotions. Like, I don't think, and I think I've persuaded my mum she's going to have a service now. My dad, I'm not
Brilliant.
so sure about yet. But, I'm trying to explain. I'm like, and because my mum's like, I just, I don't like going, I don't like the crying in public. And I'm like, it's a funeral, it's okay. And actually,
Yeah.
why have we got to this point in society where it's almost like we're shaming people for expressing
Mm.
emotion at someone's
Yeah.
passing? I'm like,
Yeah.
that's just ridiculous. And so those are the things where you sort of, as you say, like with the direct cremations, obviously it ticks a box financially. But for some people, they think it also ticks a box to protect people's emotions. But
Mm.
the reality is, I think that you just, I don't think you can avoid it. You're just kicking the can down the road. And actually, to have it in a funeral, and part of the reason why people really enjoy the afters is because they have had an emotional release during the
Yeah.
service,
Mm.
and they've shed, and they might shed more tears, but there's often, like, if you go to that, it's the energy is different.
Yeah,
There's
it
It's
is.
like a big exhale. Everybody is like,
Yeah.
we've sighed, we've held our
Yeah.
breath to sort of say goodbye. This emotional release has happened, and so you relax into a different energy. And I think if you don't
Totally.
have the service bit, and just go to this. You haven't had the release.
Yeah, totally. It's something I often comment on, that actually the noise that you hear outside of, like, you will know this, when we step
Mm.
out of the chapel and the mourners are exiting, the sound that you hear the most is laughter.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
because it is just that pent up release and
Mm.
relief. Um, yeah, and there is nothing wrong with families who are reserved and private to have a very
Mm.
small,
Yeah,
very private service. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. This isn't about that. It's about, like you say, this podcast educating and sharing so that people
mm.
can get a better idea, because I think it helps massively with the whole process, that when you are faced with having to deal with this, which we all will be at some point, it if you've got a bit more of a better understanding,
Mm.
it just makes such a massive difference on coping
Yeah.
with it practically, and also your grief and going through it all as well.
Yeah, I do think that if you're maybe listening to this and think, actually, I relate to the how do I make this easier for my family or the loved ones that are still here, and you know, but there's another option instead of opting out of the service is to actually write down what you want.
Yeah.
And so you take away the burden from them having to, even things like the chronology of your life, like,
Yes. Yeah.
or, I often think that, if I were to pass today,
Mm.
um, obviously my partner's here, my parents would probably be quite involved in that, but there's so much to my life that they don't know or they know
Mm.
about, so they'll be like, oh, she was a celebrant, but they don't really know much about that. I'm involved in netball. They'll be like, oh, she plays and coaches netball, but like they've not gone and spoken to anyone to think about how did she impact people's lives, or like my
Mm.
friendship groups are quite expansive and I've got different because that align to different interests as probably most people do.
Yeah.
But if you're then relying on two or three people in a room with a celebrant to capture your life and the things that you did,
Mm.
that A might feel a lot of pressure for them, but also it might not truly reflect who you are. So you can actually take
Very
more
true.
control and responsibility in things like choosing the songs or choosing some of the pictures, or please don't include this in my survey,
Yeah.
or
Don't mention
whatever.
XYZ.
I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because, I know it's for the living and not the dead, but like, ultimately we are, I suppose commemorating, honoring, celebrating
Yeah, you can
whatever
still have your
language you
wishes
want.
in there.
Yeah, and I think, because sometimes it's like I always find it really interesting when I go to a service, somebody that I maybe didn't know very well, or I've gone to support somebody. And I love hearing these. Maybe this goes back to your point around we just are story collectors, and that's just something
Yeah.
we're
I
passionate
love
about.
that. Yeah.
And, when you hear about people or, when it's somebody that you sort of knew a little bit and you suddenly discover this whole other side to their life,
Mm.
or things they used to do, or that, they were suddenly like massive in their community, or,
Mm.
they won a gold medal at some kind of like,
Yeah.
and you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. And that's where you sort of think, but if the people who are talking to the person writing and delivering your service don't know any of this,
Mm.
um, it's quite tricky. So,
Yeah, it is. And also, those that are grieving, your head is a
mm,
shed.
absolutely.
Trying to remember stuff, and like you mentioned, all the practical admin that you've got to do.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's just like you can't think straight. You can't, even
Mm,
remembering that person's date of birth sometimes, or the date they got married. It's just like it just goes,
it does.
and it feels awful when that happens, because you just think, well, why can I not remember this stuff? And it is because your brain has gone into safe mode,
Yeah.
like cars do when they drive at 5 miles an hour just so you can get somewhere. That's what's happening with our body and our brain. We're in safe mode. So right, I'm a massive advocate of writing things down. I've even created a my funeral planner for people that's based around the
Yeah.
questions that I
Yeah.
ask when I go see
Yeah.
them. To say, just write it down. Just it just yeah, write it down, because
Yeah.
even if we're lucky to get to at 80s or 90s, there might be dementia or Alzheimer's in the family, and those memories have gone.
Mm,
And often, sometimes as children, or certainly when you get older in life, you get busy with life, and then it's too late to have asked those questions. And it's something you hear so frequently about, especially people with dementia and Alzheimer's, that though the family members wish they'd asked those questions before the
mm.
onset,
Yeah,
before the memories were lost. And it's not that they've done anything wrong through that. It's just life. It's just so busy, and you just kind of always expect your parents, your special person, whoever
hmm,
it may be, to just always kind of be as they are. And then suddenly things change, and you realize actually it's a bit late now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that just pops into mind when you were saying, about some of what people find difficult is when there's division in a family
Yeah, it's really
and
common.
how, or whether it's proper division or whether things have drifted. And, because relationships ebb and flow, like,
Mm,
it's a natural thing to occur. And, I think that's something that maybe compounds nervousness when you go in to meet if in and also
mm,
things like where somebody's been married and divorced or it wasn't great and how do you deal with
mm,
and but this is the bit where like I suppose for us as celebrants where the trick around holding space where people feel that they can be really open with you about what happened because
definitely.
the more I think they can be open, that's not to say it's going in the service, but it gives you context to be able
Mm,
to allow the service to flow or where you're omitting things and
mm,
actually even stylistically how you might approach the service. Um, and I think the other thing for anyone listening where you really relate to like, oh, actually that I really feel that because like, I don't talk to my ex, the father of my kids anymore, and like I don't want that in the service. But it's just to
mm,
give you reassurance that the celebrant will be able to weave your narrative and
totally.
get to the nub of who you are. And even if you actually, another thing I find is sometimes people shy away from being honest about who the person was.
Mm.
I'm a fan of like I'm like just say it as it was because rather than like people coming to a funeral and thinking who is this
Is it?
person that they're
Yeah,
talking about,
they weren't like
like
that.
and
Yeah,
actually I was like there's a way in which it can all be presented because sometimes
definitely.
we want to honor the person who's passed, but at the end of the day, if they were an absolute,
Mm,
insert your appropriate word here, we shouldn't necessarily bypass that
mm,
but there's a way in which we can present these things and we can present the positives as well as being true and authentic to who
yeah,
the person was.
and that is the skill of a celebrant, is being
Mm,
able to do that. Um, we're almost coming to the end, so I
I
want you
know.
to tell me about. You mentioned this podcast. Tell
Oh,
me about this
yeah.
podcast.
So my friend Sandra Logan and I have a podcast called The No Taboo Woo Woo Show. And
Awesome.
I know we've been talking about it for ages. I actually met Sandra when I did some Reiki training, and when you just meet people and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
and
like we are, because
yes,
when we had this
absolutely.
conversation
I
before
know.
the
I was
recording,
like, I was
I've
like, oh,
done
this
that. I like
podcast
that.
could go for hours. Absolutely.
Yeah, two
Um,
peas from the same pod we are.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so Sandra and I share a passion about Reiki, but also like tarot, oracle cards, all things woo-woo, things that we've experienced, things that we haven't experienced, but also like, things like talking about death and dying,
Mm,
talking about the difficult stuff in life, the tools that we use to help us get through these things. So that's maybe
right.
where some of like the woo-woo stuff comes in. I talk about some of the death and dying, other aspects because we are both, I suppose, multi-passionate beings, and even just well, if we've gone and tried something, we bring that back and have a chat about it. We like to describe it as like you're eavesdropping on like two pals having a chat in a cafe because often that's what it is, and
Brilliant.
we're not scripted. We do a tarot or oracle card pull every time. Sometimes it's the intention is always that it's at the start, but there's been many where it's been at the end, and it's just where the conversation flows. And some of that we sort of think we're it's like divinely guided in that way of like whatever's
Yeah,
meant to be talked about is what's ever
yeah,
meant to be talked about. And,
yeah,
we hope that it helps some people. Um, but yeah, it's good. I do try and be a bit more of like kind of that death advocacy and just talk about
yes,
life
yeah.
and how we exist and how we die. And sometimes we
Excellent.
talk about what might happen after,
Yeah.
about belief
Oh,
systems as well. So
I am so subscribing to that podcast because I know that when
we
I
should get
listen
you
to
on,
it,
Anna. I was
oh
telling
yeah,
Sandra I was coming on this, and I was like, because I was said to her, I was like, how like I chat about death and dying and so on, and she was like, oh, we should get Anna on. I was like, yes, we should. So we could
yeah.
do a
I mean,
reciprocal. That would be great.
everything you said, like both of us have done the a death
Mm,
doula sort of course program thing. I've done Reiki as well. I'm into crystals and pulling cards and the universe.
yeah.
I'm just like completely spiritually like there. And there was a time that I would never talk about it. And in fact, right now at the moment, the clock is 11:11. So anybody that's into that kind of thing, they will
Oh.
recognize what that means. But I before I would never talk about it.
No.
But in the last 5 years, I've well and truly come out of my spiritual closet,
Mm,
and actually, I think in the process of talking to various people, actually that helps with their own grief.
yeah.
The two kind of interwoven. But yeah, we could talk for hours on end. So I might have to have you back on again. As a second appearance as a guest. But yes, I would love to come and chat to you and your friend
Yeah.
about all of that because it'd
Especially
be
how these
fabulous.
things sort of like uh, weave in between the two. And I think, depending on who the person was, would be whether I actually brought it up in an actual conversation with a client. But what
Mm,
I do think is that let's call them our woo-woo tools. Like I think they help me support the clients because it's how I sort of manage my own energy means then that how I can hold space for clients means that they probably get things that are unseen from maybe and that's the thing I suppose in this world as a celebrant is sometimes actually maybe this is an opportunity for us to step into more of that space because I think there are people out there who would appreciate that. And I think
mm,
it also supports me with I know we haven't talked about this just now, but maybe it might be something for the future around like the kind of the practicalities of being a celebrant and holding space and working
yeah,
with people's energy in this way and how we ground ourselves before and after. And
yeah.
I have conversation like when I get a client in and always have a chat with the person who's passed, and
I do
uh,
that
I
too.
know, and then when I'm there, and when we arrive at the chapel, I'm always like have a chat. I'm like, right, come on, let's do this. We're going to do pray today, and and
Yeah,
it's like dialogue in my head, and then I
yeah.
have a little routine or a little ritual afterwards where I light a candle, say a few words just between me and the person that's
Oh,
passed, and
brilliant.
blow it out. And sometimes the candle goes out straight away, and sometimes it doesn't, because I sort of wish them well, and and it's these are the tools that support us, but actually, sometimes I get a sense with a client that then I will share more of those because sometimes it
Mm,
feels that they would be open, and these are things that can support them with their grief and their journey of what's next after their loved one has passed.
yeah, yeah. Oh, honestly, Gail, I could chat here all
Time
day
has
with you,
flown
and
by.
I love the fact that actually you're just across the Pennines from me,
I
and that
know.
you've moved closer to me. You see, it was meant to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely.
um, right, thank you, Gail. I mean, I love the way you have shared and articulated so well today, and just everything you've said has just really resonated with me, and yeah, I'm totally with you, and I'm certain that folk listening to this will have got so many nuggets of
Mm.
golden stuff from you from today. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of that with me, with us.
Thank you
It's
for
just
having
been
me.
brilliant. Thank
And
you.
yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you for having this podcast and being in this space. Because as you started off, like the more we can talk about this, the better people will feel supported.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Anna Bushell, and you have been watching Let's Chat Death, Dying, Funerals, and Grief. Until next time, take care and see you soon.